recently completed a contract with the INRIX, a statewide traffic data contract, which will greatly enhance our capabilities across the state, and hopefully then in the near future with all of our local and regional partners as well. With that, I think that covers all of my updates. I'll be with you all afternoon and looking forward to this meeting. Thank you.
Darren, thank you so much. And you mentioned the meeting this morning, the EDC meeting, that really underscored how these emerging technologies build on the base of existing technologies and business practices. It's not an either or, it's really, building on strengths we have, pruning away things we don't need, adding things that add value. And I think that STIC's work is very central to that process of finding the optimal mix of technology and business practices to make it happen. Our next person for update is Marcus Wilner from FHWA's Texas Division, Deputy Division Administrator. Welcome, Marcus. And I would ask the folks who are behind the scenes and who've worked really hard to organize this virtual meeting, if you would post the bios of the presenters in chat so we all have that, but rather than me reciting them, make that available to the group in that way, and that saves more time for the presenters. So Marcus, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Tom. I'm stepping in today for our division administrator, Al Alonzi, who co-chairs this group with Darren, and I'm glad to be here today. And really the last couple things that both Tom and Darren talked about, everyday counts, that's what I want to touch on very briefly this afternoon. So believe it or not, we are moving towards the sixth iteration or the sixth round, EDC 6 of everyday counts. We began this thing back in the fall of 2010, and consistently we've rolled out a new round just about every 2 years in the fall, which really gives a couple years for implementation. And that's really what this group does, is talks about implementing some of these various technologies and initiatives. So expect a rollout next month, September. Our administrator, FHWA administrator, Nicole Nason, will be transmitting that and announcing kind of what the new initiatives are. And expect that there'll be some carryover initiatives from EDC 5, maybe EDC 4 as in the past. But we're looking at likely no more than 10 new innovations to consider implementing for us here in Texas this year. Now, the kind of the virtual world, this unique climate that we're in, a lot of the things that Darren just talked about, how things are being delivered, that's going to apply for everyday count summits as well. If you've been involved in past iterations or past rounds, typically in the fall we do summits, a handful across the country, kind of regionally. And so we're going to do those virtual this year, and a little bit later in the year than maybe we've done in past rounds, looking at the November to December timeframe. So our Federal Highway Center for Accelerating Innovation is working on their website to update their fact sheets, subject matter experts for the new initiatives, videos, all that kind of stuff. So look for that to be updated next month with each when the announcement comes out for EDC 6. And I will, after I'm done here, I'll post our website on the in the chat pod, but it's pretty basic for at least our innovation group. It's fhwa.dot.gov/innovation. So I encourage you to check that site out, look for the announcement next month. And Kirk Falver from our office is our lead for this effort, and I know he'll be communicating with everybody here as well once EDC rolls out. And that's all I've got, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And while we have you, since we are meeting virtually because of the pandemic, has FHWA done any, how can I say, planning or informed speculation on the long-term impact of teleworking on transportation? I just wonder if there's anything that you've come across in that area.
Nothing definitive, but it's certainly a consideration, especially as it impacts things such as the Highway Trust Fund, as people potentially are traveling less and not contributing as much to the Highway Trust Fund, and could that bring a shortage in the nearer future, potentially, in the number of receipts going into the Highway Trust Fund? And our early projections are that probably next spring, April-May timeframe, is when we could run into some cash shortfall issues from the Highway Trust Fund. So that's maybe the most direct impact to increased telework and less travel that I can think of. Great,
thank you for that. I have a note that from the organizers that some participants are having trouble accessing meeting chat, and we apologize for that. If you would like to participate, please raise your hand. We'll call on you and give you a chance to speak up. Make sure you unmute at that time. So our next speaker is Kevin Pete, who's TxSTIC's Director of Research and Implementation Division. Kevin, the floor is yours. Kevin, we're not hearing you.
I think I muted myself. How you guys doing this afternoon? Again, my name is Kevin Pete, and thanks everyone for joining again.
Kevin, you seem to be muted again.
Yeah, looked like someone muted me that time. Again, my name is Kevin Pete, and thanks everybody for joining the STIC meeting and the presenters that are going to be presenting on various topics of interest. Regarding the RTI program and the actual problem statement call. So currently we have a problem statement call that's out, and hopefully some of you guys have had the opportunity to submit problem statements or ideas for consideration for research in our FY22 fiscal year. If you haven't, you still have time. Problem statements are due September 4th, so next month. So you still have time to provide those. If there's any questions regarding how you might do that, you can always reach out to our TxSTIC website for research, or send us an email at rtimain@txstit.gov to provide any ideas that you have, and we'll reach out to you and perhaps formulate those for you in a form that we typically use for those ideas. And so those are due September 4th. And then from there, once we receive all those, we'll actually have our functional area committees where we have our technical experts vetting all of those problem statements. And we have 5 different committees that look at these statements, and they're kind of categorized into those 5 different buckets. So first, there's strategy and innovation, and that meeting is planned to occur October 19th. And if you want to participate in that, where you can chime in on any of the ideas that's presented, whether or not they're actually worthwhile doing or anything like that, you can attend that meeting and follow up with Chris Glancy at chris.glancy@txstit.gov, and he can provide you more information for that meeting. The next meeting is the Planning and Environmental Committee meeting, and that one is happening Thursday, October the 29th. A Structures and Hydraulics Committee meeting is occurring November the 2nd. That's Monday, November the 2nd. And topics related to structures and hydraulics will be discussed in that meeting. And then Safety and Operations, which we typically get most of our project problem statements showing up in that particular committee, is occurring on November the 3rd. So you can participate on that one. And then Construction, Maintenance, and Material related problem statements and ideas will occur on November the 4th. So for any of that detail, you can either contact Shelley or anyone in the research division, and we can provide you with better information. In addition to that, we're planning tentatively to schedule our Research Oversight Committee meetings, which are typically attended by our senior leadership, that in particular being the district engineers who are looking at these ideas. And we're looking at tentatively planning those for December 1st through December the 9th, and we'll see how that lays out. And so look for more information as we solidify those dates and share that. In addition to that, I do know that we recently had a STIC peer exchange with Michigan DOT, and I'm sure Shelley will probably provide you a little bit more detail. I believe she's following up after me as well. However, I think the TxSTIC is doing very, very well in comparison to some of the other sticks that have been stood up in the United States. So that's a great testament to you guys and the involvement that you have there and the work that we're doing here in Texas. So Tom, that's all I have.
Kevin, that's great news that we're doing well vis-a-vis our peers. I wonder if I can pose on you if you could maybe add to the chat key link to your website, just so folks could access them if they would. And just one question, the open call for problem statements, is that limited to public sector proposers, or can universities or other folks submit ideas?
Yeah, anyone can submit an idea. We typically look at it from a TxSTIC perspective on those ideas as far as a priority for the DOT itself. So those ideas we would want to have at least consideration of its impact on the state as well as the DOT as a whole in vetting those ideas. So yeah, it's open to any and everyone. And if you can find someone who also is within TxSTIC who is willing to be a champion or in support of that idea, that would be even better.
Great. That's really helpful background. Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Kurt Favre from FHWA. He's the Research and Transportation Planner. Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. Just wanted to thank everybody for participating today at the Crowdsourcing for Operations webinar. We had about 90 individuals register for the webinar, and we had 60 that actually participated today. But FHWA Office of Operations, NCT COG, Genesis Pulse, NCT Emergency Communications District, and the City of Frisco participated. And most of it was the crowdsourcing discussion was around WAYS and about the WAYS community and how it's a grassroots support for crowdsourced data for detecting roadway incidents and other types of delays due to congestion. NCT COG was mentioned earlier, supported the webinar, and they have local partners to benefit from crowdsourced data. And they use that information to detect roadway incidents, large and small, and in a crowdsourced universe. But if you want more information about the Crowdsourcing for Operations webinar that was held today from 10 to 11:30, we've actually recorded it, and we're going to send out an email to the participants and anyone who's interested in a link to the recording of that session. And it was an excellent session. We had an outstanding group of panelists, and we just had excellent discussion and interaction with the participants as well. So thank you, Tom, for moderating that session, the panel discussion especially. I'd like to give you all an overview of the Texas Research Program. I was wondering, do you have the slides, or do I need to pull the slides up?
We have the slides, I believe.
Okay, how do you advance them? Can we advance them?
I'll have to ask our organizers.
Okay, there we go.
Here we go.
All right, I'm going to give you a quick overview. Kevin mentioned you a little bit about the open call for projects, proposals, and next slide. Just want to give you an indication of the size of our program. We have a $28.8 million program. We use TDCs for the state match. 20% or 5.8 million comes from TDCs. We have 32 actually transportation pooled fund projects. Number of staff is 15. We'll show you a list of those staff. And we have about 4.5 million in cooperative highway research program dollars that are programmed in the FY 2020 work program. Go ahead, next slide. This is a list of the 15 RTI contacts. We have about 1.9 million that's allocated for this management and administration of the RTI division, and that money comes out of SPR Subpart B, Part 2 research funds. Next slide. This is the FY21 research program by functional area. Kevin mentioned there's five main ones: construction, planning, environment, safety, strategy and innovation, structures and hydraulics. By far, it looks like the structures and hydraulics are getting the most money right now for the funding out of the SPR Part 2 FY21 research program. Next slide. This is a distribution of funds for the research program by university, and we have about over a dozen universities shown here. TTI, CTR, and UT Arlington are the top three. This is the annual certification statement. We require the certification statement with the application. It's a grant, basically, of each work program, and it basically says that the TxSTIC is following all the rules, regulations, and procedures under federal law. Next slide. The annual performance and expenditure report is something that we require annually, I guess at about 3 months after the end of each fiscal year. And it basically shows established goals and actual performance with those goals, the progress in meeting schedules, the status of expenditures, the cost overruns, and the revisions. Next slide. These are the contracted funds versus actual expenditures. I think TxDOT RTI has a goal of 85.5%. And I believe we're meeting that across the board by each university in terms of the amount that's allocated for contracts versus actually spent. Next slide. These are expenditures by program. Research by far has the largest amount of program funding, about $14.6 million. And for implementation, about $5 million. Next slide. TxDOT has a research activities website, so if you wanted to find out more about the TxDOT research programs, there's actually a keyword search that you can look up for, like drones, disaster response, the value of research, the work zone safety. Those are hot topics, and video summary reports for completed research. Some of the completed research products are available. Next slide. Functional area committees, I'm going to skip over this because Kevin has already mentioned the functional area committees. Next slide. These are more the 5 functional areas. Research Oversight Committee. Go ahead, next slide. This is the 15 ROC members. There's 9 voting members of 5 division directors that Kevin mentioned, the 5 non-voting members. And there's 1 member from Federal Highway Texas Division that make up the ROC. Next slide. This is just more information about the ROC and who and when they meet and discuss the prioritize the recommended list of problem statements before submitting the final recommendations for approval to the executive committee. Next slide. So as part of the research selection process, the problem statements are gathered and the TxDOT portfolio manager reviews the problem statements for completeness, eligibility, and so forth. Next slide. The problem statements are rated, prioritized, and the facts are meeting to discuss the problem statements. The problem statements are reviewed and combined at some point if they are the similar nature, and the resulting list goes to the ROC. Next slide. This is just more information about the research selection process and how the problem statements themselves are converted to project statements, and then as the basis of requests for proposals are sent out to the universities for bidding purposes. Next slide. This is a diagram that shows the committee involvement in the research program, the functional area committees, the research oversight committee, and it is a loop that goes around, and Federal Highway approves the work program development, but it goes back and the research program is approved and the projects are activated. Next slide. TxSTIC has a research manual. I just want to mention that the research manual includes all the management processes that must be approved by the Federal Highway Division Office under 23 CFR 420. Next slide. The University Handbook is another guide for the universities to go and figure out the procedures, the processes, and the guidance that are related to the research program. So it represents a large number of these procedures. Next slide. These are monthly research digests that are published by TxDOT. Some of them are selected TRB publications. Some of them are selected state DOT reports that are highlighted within the monthly. These are May and June of 2020. Next slide. And I just want to mention this is a report that came out to provide guidance on the US DOT's public access plan, how research is supposed to be accessed by the public, and the goals to make it easier to communicate scientific knowledge to the public. This is a guide that's important and needs to be mentioned since it just came out in 2019. Next slide.
Hey, Kirk, going back to the Research Digest, are those
Yes.
Accessible in the previous slide? Are those accessible through a some form where they get disseminated? So
you can be added to the mailing list. It's through the CTR, University of Texas Center for Transportation Research.
Okay.
And if you contact the library, they'll put you on the mailing list to get those on a monthly basis.
Great, thank you.
All right, next slide, and then the next slide. Next. Okay, the STIC, I just wanted to announce that we are winners of the 2018 award for AASHTO's Excellence, and we managed this through the RTI division. And for purposes of going back and looking at our accomplishments and STIC incentive type of applications, EDC workshops and events and funding opportunities, it's all there at the texasltap.org website. Next slide. For additional information, TxDOT does YouTube channel information, Twitter feed, social media through newsletters and annual reports. Again, the central repository for the research is the Center for Transportation Research Library, University of Texas at Austin, and there's their phone number. And there's my contact information, and hope I had enough time to get through all this. So appreciate this opportunity to present. And it's time to move on to the next speaker.
It's not time to move on. You're not getting off this easy. We got a question from Darren Anderson. Can Kirk talk a little bit about how FHWA presented EDC research at our last fall short course and continue to make those available through our LTAP program?
Okay, surely. Thanks, Darren, for that question. As part of the short course last year in October, we enlisted the help of the LTAP program that's managed by University of Texas in Arlington. And through the help of their office, we sponsored an innovation summit. And we had about 10, I think 8 to 10 innovations that were highlighted and showcased at this summit. And we had some pretty good interplay among the participants. Over, we had a couple hundred participants come through, maybe more. And James Bass came through, Mark Williams came through, the number 2 at TxDOT. And we're planning to do more of that, probably on a virtual scale as part of the next virtual short course that's happening in October. We're planning to have a link to EDC 6 events, training, webinars, and fact sheets on the virtual site for the website for the EDC 6 products will be on the TxDOT short course website. But until that happens, we'll let you know as things progress, and we'll give you some more information as we get closer to that time frame.
That's great, thank you. And if someone wants to volunteer for one of the FACs, is there a process for that?
I think just need to contact Chris Glancy over at TxDOT RTI or Kevin Pete. I think Chris is the one taking lead as the portfolio manager now, since Kevin's been promoted. But Kevin, I'll let you chime in.
Yes, that's correct, Kirk. Please contact Chris Glancy for that particular process. It may also require, if it is someone within TxSTIC, it may require their supervisor approval as well to participate on that particular committee. But contact him and we'll try to make sure you get set up and added.
Thank you.
And Kirk, is the funding for research something that is done by formula among the states, or do states have a role in setting how much funding they devote to research activities? And if so, how does Texas compare to other peer DOTs?
Well, we're the second largest SPR Subpart B program in the country. And of course, that money is allocated a portion by formula. It's a 2% takedown from the portion programs, like for CMAQ, NHPP, Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, Interstate Maintenance. These portion programs, there's a 25% or 2% takedown. Wish it was 25%. 2% takedown, and of that 2%, 25% of it must be used for research. So we get about 28 million a year for research based on the formulas. And it's been a steady stream of funding all throughout through the Federal Aid Highway Act. The formula has not been changed since ICE-T, as far as I know, and Safety Lou. So we're still getting a stream of money coming in through that apportion formula, and hopefully Congress will continue to support that research in the next Highway Act, but yet to be determined.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm now going to turn on to our next speaker, Kevin, and I may mispronounce your last name, Perin or Perini. Maybe you can clear that up, and you have the floor for your presentation.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Ken Perrine, and I'm going to present our project on weather responsive management strategies. And I just want to make sure anybody can hear me.
We can hear you and see you just fine.
Excellent. Well, I'm very happy to be here today and excited to see what's been going on with other research efforts, and had actually attended the crowdsourcing workshop today as well. And with this, can we go to the next slide? Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly go over our project team headed by TxDOT Wade Odell, but also a number of TxDOT folks that are very interested in what's going on. They all have vested interests from a traffic operations or safety perspective, and then a number of associates at CTR, Center for Transportation Research at UT Austin, who are working on this project as well. Next slide, please. So the EDC 5 objectives for this project is to develop a demonstration weather responsive management strategy. Along with that, the TxDOT project objective is to demonstrate it within a relevant environment, a TRL level 6. And I'll get to what that looks like. But also with that, have the strategy increase effectiveness and reduce costs. How can we improve the ability for us to respond to severe winter weather? How can we do other things such as more effectively communicate to the traveling public? How can we increase safety? Next slide, please. So with that, our strategy really comprises of these goals of trying to reach objectives of reducing brine treatment, reduce impact on roadways, reduce the effect of travel time changes when there's winter weather treatment. And we, as researchers, have certain ideas on what's possible, but really the most effective way to prove or generate ideas on what's possible is to have technological demos, to be able to demonstrate real technology in real scenarios and see if our ideas work and see if new ideas come about in the actual application of those demonstrations. Next slide, please. So our demo location is within Abilene, Texas. which is a moderate-sized city that's in a very rural area. And they actually really do have winter weather, and they have to do a lot of work to proactively prepare for it and to continuously treat the roadways during times of impending winter weather so that severe ice situations, dangerous snow buildup do not happen. So this is a very interesting area because it provides a good proving ground for the use of the sensors and the computing backend analysis that we're trying to throw at the project. Next slide, please. In a nutshell, we're illustrating the effectiveness of this project by describing the sorts of data sources that we're trying to put into places that are very accessible to traffic operations personnel. First of all, there's the already existing Lone Star active traffic management system. And there's also the GeoEvent server and Esri resources that TxSTIC is starting to bring on within their redeveloped IT infrastructure. Part of that redeveloped IT infrastructure has the ability to take in vehicle locations, vehicle trajectories from a fleet management system that is being deployed within TxSTIC now. Almost all TxSTIC vehicles are equipped with a fleet tracking system that is able to track the GPS locations of those vehicles for reporting purposes, and also be able to have live data go into a GeoEvent server where ArcGIS-based applications can leverage that data for real visualizations. The most exciting part of this project is to be able to add value to that by adding field treatment activity to that GeoEvent server stream so that we know where weather treatment activity is happening within the field. Along with that, we also are looking at various weather sensing technologies, both weather sources that exist already and weather stations that we're deploying ourselves within that demonstration area around Abilene. With that, we're also incorporating mobile roadway surface characterization detectors that will be mounted on a couple vehicles. Meanwhile, as separate demonstrations, we're looking at a bridge deck temperature and road surface characterization mechanism. And we're also looking at a mobile eyesight, which is a road surface characterization sensor that will be mounted on a Hero vehicle, which is an incident response vehicle within the Austin district. Next slide, please. On the back end, the researchers at UT are looking at effective ways of being able to augment those discrete weather measurements that are in specific locations within the Austin or the Abilene district, and be able to predict what the weather conditions are within every location in the analysis region. That involves spatial interpolation, and you can see that in the graphic on the right. The blue lines that are around the various towns where the weather detectors are located are interpolated so that every location between is estimated on what the weather conditions are. That's very powerful when trying to predict what the weather conditions are on various roadways. With that, we want to be able to superimpose treatment activity on top of that within the ArcGIS enterprise system that's being deployed within TxSTIC. With that, we are also taking weather data from the fixed weather sensors that the TxSTIC Abilene folks have deployed within the Abilene district. And you can see a couple of those deployments on the pictures on the lower right. We're also planning to hold a workshop in spring next year, which will describe what we've done and also describe what sorts of sensors we used, what we could expect from them, and have game plans for how other districts can implement similar systems within their own places. Next slide, please. Right now, we're looking at working with a engineering firm within the Abilene area on being able to equip winter weather treatment vehicles with sensors that detect whether the sprayer is turned on or off, or whether the sprayer is actually spreading sand on roadways, or if the plow is lowered or raised. These are actually rather simple, but involve sensors that require some expertise in order to design. And within the project, we are designing 4 sensor kits that will be installed on 4 different vehicles, and we'll be able to document exactly what those sensors are and how they can be hooked into the existing fleet management system. Again, the whole goal is to be able to reproduce this effort within other districts so that other districts will be able to have the same capabilities as what we're trying to demonstrate within the Abilene district. In fact, today I'm going to be hopping in my car and driving up to Abilene to meet with that engineering firm tomorrow for delivery for those 4 sensor kits. So this is a very exciting time for the project in that regard. Meanwhile, researchers here at UT are working on incorporating the data feeds that will be coming from those sensors across the fleet management system into visualizations that are based on the ArcGIS online platform. We're also working with Devin Smith on some of the tracking systems and visualizations he's working on so that we can add winter weather treatment activity to those same visualizations that have already been demonstrated to a few folks within TxSTIC. We'll continue to push forward with our bridge ice sensing effort that we're doing on the 11th Street Bridge in downtown Austin, and also work on incorporating one of the road surface sensors on a Hero vehicle for incident detection within the Austin district. Next slide, please. Our schedule looks like this, where the winter season's going to be coming, and during that time we will be collecting data during the freezing days and really understanding what kinds of data and what can we do with the data from those winter weather sensors. And then in the spring we'll have that workshop. Stay tuned for the date on the workshop, most likely held virtually and, if permitting, in person in Abilene. Next slide, please. And this is an activity or a log of activities that we've done for the project. Right now, imminently, we have our bridge deck freezing, or we had in February the bridge deck freezing measurements. And then imminently this month, we're going to be receiving the 4 sensor kits for equipping the winter weather treatment vehicles in Abilene. Next slide. So with that, I thank you for your attention and invite any questions that you have.
I don't see any questions or hand raised, which I'm surprised. This is a great presentation. A quick question. You mentioned you attend the crowdsourcing seminar this morning. I know at that session, Brian Moen from Fisco showed an example of looking at a Waze ICE report and responding. Any thought of integration of Waze incident reports into to supplement the sensors that you're using?
Yes, as part of the project, we actually interviewed a couple public information officers, both in the Austin district and the Abilene district. And both of them are very, very interested in being able to integrate the capabilities that are already offered by Waze and other third parties. But they also identify challenges that may be encountered in proper attribution of where data sources come from, and also the balance between private interests that those commercial entities would have versus the public interest that TxDOT would have. So these are all issues I think are very worthwhile for working out. And I realize that there are other DOTs that have worked out some of those details. And I'd like to be able to learn from those other DOTs and see what can be incorporated within TxDOT that would actually really work within this system.
Any other questions from the group? We have 80 plus people, and we have a very interesting approach here.
Yes, I see that Lee Taylor has hand raised.
Yes, go ahead. Lee?
Yes, a very good presentation, Kenneth. My name is Taylor Lee. I'm a assistant professor from UT Arlington. I'm very interested in the road weather system, because I just wonder, because we have other resources for mass cost-effective resources like weather from some internet service providers. Have you ever compared to those two sources? And do you think there's a potential to use internet weather provider to have a more cost-effective solution to your problem?
Yes, if feasible, can you go back about 5 slides? There's a data architecture, and on there we have listed the various sources that we're looking at. because of the time limit of the presentation, I just wanted to focus on the weather sensors that we're deploying, but we're also looking at the West Texas Mesonet data sources, of which they actually do have a couple weather stations within the area, and also a National Weather Service. And we want to overlay those as part of the data sources that are available among the weather stations that we're deploying. With that, we'll have a better sense of what can we have with the weather sources that are already existing out there versus the sources that we're deploying. And then that can help us answer questions on how worthwhile is it for us to deploy our weather sensors, or can we really rely upon those weather sensors that are provided by other entities? With that, we can also get a better sense on reliability and resilience, just in case there's failures, or if we have a situation where we have various geography which would really isolate weather scenario or weather phenomenon within localized areas. So all these are very valid questions I'm hoping we'll be able to present more in depth in our seminar that we'll have in the spring.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking forward to that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
We have a question from Kevin Pete. Are any of the counties, cities doing similar research or having similar issues?
Yes, I have heard of another project that is happening in Wade, you might have to remind me on this. Wade Odell might have the answer to this, but there's a district up north that's also doing a test with equipping winter weather treatment vehicles with sensors that detect treatment activity. And there's also other DOTs across the United States that are very actively looking into this. In fact, that's really going to be a lot of the talk that's going to be happening, in fact, next week at the Road Weather Management Stakeholder meeting that will be happening federally, virtually. So there are other entities that are looking into this. I think there are a lot of opportunities as we have multiple efforts. I also realize that we don't want to reinvent the wheel in each situation. And one of the big emphases that I want to have for this particular project is to leverage as much as possible the existing IT infrastructure and the fleet vehicle management that TxSTIC already has. So again, we're not reinventing anything or redeploying parallel technologies.
Great. I saw a question from raised hand, I believe, Wade Odell.
Thanks. Thanks, Tom. And yeah, I was actually going to respond to what Ken said a moment ago about the vehicles being equipped or getting equipped. Both Lubbock districts and Amarillo districts, of course, experience abnormally high winter weather, at least for Texas, every year events. And so they're being proactive about getting into this. Also, Childress District is also involved in this too. So those are the big three districts when it comes to winter weather operations and the vehicles, the fleet that they're using to deal with that. So I just wanted to add that.
That's great. Thank you. And I see Joanne Steele offered. Is that a link, Joanne, to a paper or a project? Can you elaborate?
It isn't a link. That's a project that I'm working on in Wichita Falls with Mosin Shahandashti with winter weather operations.
Got it.
And we're equipping snow plows in Wichita.
And this is, I guess, a question to both of you. I understand that some other DOTs equip their snow vehicles and then propagate the information about where they're located to a map that the public can access, so they can, for example, choose to travel on a road that's recently been treated. Do either of your projects involve informing the public of where road treatment operations have happened?
Yes, by tapping into the ArcGIS enterprise system and also really working with Devin Smith on some of the visualizations that he's already created for that platform that's being deployed within TxSTIC. The whole purpose behind that is not only to have visualizations that can demonstrate and display that sort of information for operations, but also to be able to present that same information for the traveling public. So everything that we're doing to try to tap into that platform can be leveraged for those efforts. So this project is really trying to make that bridge into tapping into that platform. And with that, we're hoping to be able to have a demonstration that can really prove the concept that, yes, we can present this information to the traveling public.
Got it. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Ken? And I do see a hand raised. Go ahead. I'm not getting good hand raised on my my machine for some reason. So if you have raised your hand, please speak up.
Hi, this is Mohsen Shahandashti. Do you have my voice?
Yeah,
yes.
I'm working with Joanne in Wichita Falls. We are basically instrumenting snowplows to collect information and visualize that. We are collecting images from the cameras, and the live feed of them are basically visualized on ArcGIS maps, and along with other information like pavement information, pavement temperature, ambient temperature, and so on and so forth. For now, the question that Tom, you asked, are they accessible to public? For now, we have a login, username, password, basically. Since we are doing the project, now it's not, but we can make it public as soon as TxSTIC approves it. But for now, only TxSTIC personnel has access to that, can have access to those.
And just, and this is a question for both of you, do you think that there's an appetite among, let's say, travel navigation services or other trucking, trucking firm navigation services to know where ice and other hazards are on roadways? I mean, do you think there would be an appetite for the data that you are generating?
I would certainly say so.
Yeah, same here. First, we need to, of course, our focus was TxSTIC. Our focus was operations management in Texas in our project. So we are developing that specifically for TxSTIC operation management to improve snowplow operations, especially as it is related to safety of those. And if there's anything we can do to enhance that. However, I see other potentials that you mentioned, and these are basically byproducts that can be byproducts of our efforts, joint effort, our efforts that we are doing in Wichita Falls and Abilene. And I think there is great potential for that. But it wasn't our focus initially.
Understood. Well, Jianming just posted a link to a pooled fund study, and and we have reached 2:20, which is break time. There's apparently a video that if you have some time during break, you can watch it. And we are adjourned until 2:30, and we'll start at 2:30 sharp. So take a break, take a stretch, and we'll see you at 2:30.
Thank you.
Imagine being able to predict when rivers and streams will flood and make a roadway impassable hours before it happens. It would be huge for the safety of all Texas motorists and for emergency crews who need safe passage in order to provide help. Researchers at the Center for Water and the Environment at the University of Texas have built an impressive forecast portal thanks to these unique radar sensors that have been installed at 20 major water crossings along Interstate 10 between Beaumont and San Antonio. With 27,000 bridge locations in Texas, this could be just the beginning of an entire bridge system that could be monitored online, forecasting floods and saving lives across the state.
These stream gauges that are out there are giving us information that we've never had before without having to visually go out and look. So that's a benefit in itself. Knowing that there's a flood wave coming downstream and it might affect one of our structures or one of our critical routes is key to trying to be proactive when it comes to emergency management instead of reactive.
The gauges that we're putting in are non-contact gauges, and they work with a radar technology. So they basically shoot a radar beam down to the water level, and they measure two things. They measure the height of the water relative to the gauge, so they kind of know where the gauge is, so then you kind of know how close or how high the water is. Then they measure the speed of the water, which it's moving. So they measure depth or height, and then velocity of the water. And with those two components, then that's information that feeds back up into the system to try to predict what's going to happen.
And with that, we'll be able to more accurately understand the likelihood that I-10 will be flooded, and also be able to forecast that. So it's not just we're going to have to close I-10, but we anticipate being able to that I-10 will be closed in 3 hours, for example, so that traffic can be diverted onto other roads and not just come to an endpoint somewhere and suddenly there's no place to go.
I-10 was selected as kind of a key primary roadway. We cared about that, and we saw that for Hurricane Harvey and other events, I-10 is a pretty important corridor, and when it goes down, we need to be able to reroute traffic and be able to have alternate routes available to folks, right? So you click on a given gauge, it pulls up information about that gauge, and what you'll see is basically a stage hydrograph, level of the water, basically, right? Going up, going down. So some prediction of the water peaking, flooding at the height, and then coming back down. You'll see your current time, and then you'll see the prediction moving forward in time of what's going to happen in the future.
And then for each of these gauges, we have a set of photos. This is a photo of the installed gauge, and we have elevation data detail, so we know the distance from the top, the distance to the bottom of the lower chord, and then to the water level, and then to the stream bed.
It's kind of an exciting thought of, as our bridges get repaired, right? These bridges are hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to repair these bridges. As we cycle through TxSTIC over time and repair these bridges, the cost of the installation of the gauge, it's not that expensive relative to the cost of the bridge. And so there's some real potential there to kind of work it in as kind of a regular feature, perhaps optional regular feature, but a regular feature as part of certain bridges.
We're not just talking about one bridge, we're talking about the whole bridge system here. Not just talking about one highway or one bridge on a highway, but the whole highway. And that's not something that we, at least I as a hydrologist, have really thought a lot about before.
The missing piece of information that we're looking to supplement with this project is, what's the level of the bridge when you see that curve going up and down from the Weather Service? You know, such and such river's going up and down. How high is it going to get? What's it going to crest at? But the elevation of the roadways and the bridge, if the personnel can see, okay, it's going to come up and flood the road here, and then it's going to come back down and not flood the road over here, you suddenly have kind of a time window, a projection of, we think these roads are going to be underwater for 2 hours or 6 hours or 2 days or whatever that is. And so being able to forecast that and anticipate it is what we're hoping to pull the information from the gauges to the website, and then the website can send alerts and notices to our response teams that then have to deal with how to shut down those roads.
Right now, we're very reactive when it comes to flooding. We have to see the flooding, and it actually has to happen before we can react to it. This technology is probably going to give us some insight into what's coming soon, so we can stay ahead of it as much as we can and protect the traveling public. That's our #1 goal.
For more information and to find the publications for this project, please visit the TxDOT Research Library at the link shown below.
Okay, we are back live and ready to go. That was an impressive video, and it's rather ironic to show lots of water in the middle of hot August, so tantalizing us with the thought of cooler days ahead. So our next speaker is Professor Shahana Dasi from UT Arlington College of Engineering, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to present this afternoon our work, and it's a pleasure to be in another STIC meeting. Thank you for inviting me to present our work on slope repair and maintenance that I'm doing with RTI. RTI supported this research in the last few years. And could you please, Tom, go to the slide deck? Yes, thank you. This project received 2019 AASHTO High Value Research Sweet 16 Award. Next, please. Next slide, please. TxSTIC is spending a considerable amount of capital in repairing slope failures. Our preliminary surveys show that most of these, failures are recurring failures. So these recurring failures motivated us to identify highly critical highway slopes to facilitate the proactive slope maintenance decisions and to minimize these recurring failures and their costs. Next slide, please. We focused on Paris district to implement this project. The combination of extreme soil and weather and climate condition in Paris districts makes it a very a great candidate for implementation of this project. Paris district has a history of extensive failures along the highways because of extreme soil and climate conditions. Next slide, please. First, we collected data, spatial data on slopes, on soil properties, precipitation, vegetation, corridors, and past failures, and combined them in a geodatabase. Next slide, please. We combined these data from different sources in a geodatabase, and we developed a map-based interface to visualize the data. This map-based interface is a web-based interface. It works on devices, smartphones, on tablets, and on, of course, desktops. Next slide, please. This map-based interface helps us to visualize the data that we collected. We can collect, edit, and update the slope failures. We can visualize the failures, and I'll tell you in a minute how, and we can come up with some recommendations for the rehabilitation that is minimizing the chance of recurring failures. For now, access to this system that we have is protected by password, so only TxSTIC personnel can, after signing up in our system, can log in and use the system. Next slide, please. These are slope failure maps that we created. They are physically based geotechnical models behind them. They're created for over 200 already. We created them for over 300 miles of highway corridors in Paris districts. We color-coded, I'm sorry, we color-coded the susceptibility levels. So on the maps along the corridors, if you see red color, for example, it means highly critical, yellow means critical, and so on and so forth. Highly critical means that the trigger is rainfall. All our models are rainfall-induced models. More than, if with less than 3 days of raining, we have critical situation. We call those segments of slopes highly critical. If between 3 and 10 days of raining makes it critical, we call it critical, and so on and so forth. So we color-coded the sequence of slopes along highways. Next slide, please. Our physics-based methods are based on factor of safety, and the trigger is duration of raining, and I mentioned how we color-coded that. Next slide, please. This is an example of, for example, one of the slopes in Paris districts that it is. We found it is very critical, and when we checked it, we found that we already have experienced failures over there along a bridge. Next slide, please. Our models, we also calibrated them, the calibration for previous stabilization efforts. We found that in many areas that we find critical, we already have mechanically stabilized slopes that they are not critical anymore. Also, we calibrated our models for vegetation density of slopes along highways. Next slide, please. In addition to mechanically stabilized slopes and vegetation slopes, we sometimes have, it's interesting, we have sharp drops in elevation, but it's not necessarily a slope. Our system was showing them as critical, but they are not really critical. So we calibrated our models to remove those as well. Next slide, please. For example, for retaining walls, how we calibrated is we superimposed the images of the stabilized slopes on top of our susceptibility maps, and we removed them as critical, as you see in this figure. Next slide, please. Since we used images for this calibration, we validated our images with extensive field work. Next slide, please. On top of all these, we created a multi-criteria decision support system to recommend the slope repair methods and rank them. Next slide, please. We integrated this system with the slope maintenance management system, the ArcGIS method, the web-based method, and then this integration offers a list of repair methods. If we want to repair somewhere, we can, with a few clicks, we can find a list of methods. We can add our criteria, and we get a list of top 5 repair methods that can be used there. For each of these repair methods, we compiled a list of best practices to minimize the chance of failure for that type of repair. Next slide, please. We are preparing a master plan for 2 major corridors in Paris district, US 75 and US and Loop 286 around Paris district. Next slide, please. We divided these corridors to 1.5 miles strips, and for each of those, we are highlighting the critical slopes, we are indexing them, and we also create Google Earth images of those areas that are highlighting the vegetation and water management system conditions. Next slide, please. Especially, we are interested on vegetation around those critical locations. We provided figures to show how critical they are, if they are in good condition or not, and if they are not, we are recommending the repair of them. Next slide, please. We are evaluating the water management system on those critical slope locations. If we need repair or maintenance, we are highlighting that on the master plan. Next slide, please. We are putting together we are prioritizing these critical locations in the master plan by their proximity to bridges and critical roads and intersections, and also the chance of traffic interruption. So we are prioritizing those sections as well. Next slide, please. We are putting also together in the master plan the order of magnitude cost for slope repairs along highways for all of those critical locations that we found. Next slide, please. And that's it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you listened to this presentation, and I welcome questions.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Just one to lead it off, and I hope others will join. Is your work kind of confined to the basic kind of, I will say, the geological nature of the district you worked in, or is it easily scalable to districts that have very different, geophysical characteristics in other parts of Texas?
Thank you for your last basically point. In other parts of Texas, yes. In most parts of Texas, it is easily implementable in most parts because all our geotechnical models, they are based on clay soil characteristics and the soil types in Texas. If we want to move it to another state, of course, it requires significant calibration because all of the models behind what we have, they are physics-based models. For the first time, actually, we created that. This is the first time that someone creates that. This is the scale. Most of the previous models that they used in the other states like Colorado, they are statistical based. This is the first time that a physics-based model is used in this scale, the whole basically district, few counties covering. So if I want to move it to another state, most likely I need a lot of calibration. But in Texas, most likely for most of the places in Texas, with a few exceptions, it's ready to go and it can be easily implemented and extended this work. A few places in Texas with fundamentally different soil characteristics, it requires a little bit of more work to extend it to those places.
Great. A kind person said that Shelley has her hand up. So Shelley, do you want to enter and ask your question or make your statement?
Yes, I just wanted to point out that he mentioned that it was the AASHTO High Value Research Award for the Sweet 16. And basically what that meant is that TRB, this was one of the poster presentations, and I was allowed to go and present this, and I was very honored to do that. But what I noticed is how interested people from multiple different states were in this research, and they really wanted to know more about it and how they could apply it. So I thought your question, Tom, was really spot on. And Mohsen, thank you for presenting this today. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
Kirk, you have a question?
Yeah, Tom. I just noticed today that TRB or NCHRP published a new document called Advances in Unstable Slope Instrumentation and Monitoring. And I'm wondering if the Synthesis 554 would be of interest to most. And
thank you, Kirk. In fact, I saw that and I didn't have time to go in details of that, so I downloaded that and I got it with the TRB news and I guess yesterday. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, and and there is this very good opportunity to combine those instrumentations with this in order to make it even more accurate, the predictions. In the validation of this research, I found that of course, we found it that most of the previous failures in Paris district, they are among highly critical locations, and our highly critical locations is not more than 2% of the whole segments. So it was a very good predictability these models offer. Since they are geotechnical based, they're not just a statistical based. So the chance that we can we can have better predictability and we can avoid overfitting is a lot with these models. But as you mentioned, if we add that perspective also to this, I think it could be a huge enhancement of these models, especially where our understanding of the subsurface conditions are limited.
Professor, do you have a sense, do you have enough data to prioritize the TxSTIC districts where your work would generate the most savings? Are you in a position to say, or like is the Paris district, for example, chosen because it has the highest amount or expense of slope failures, or,
That's a very good question, Tom. About 6 months ago, I have another EDC 5 project about subsurface exploration with TxSTIC, with electrical resistivity imaging. So for that one, I was extensively reviewing the conditions of various districts in Texas. And for this project also, so what I did is for this project, it was not necessarily the cost savings that made us interested in that. There were several reasons behind that, but I think if we implemented from the soil conditions, I can tell you what are the top 5. There are many districts on east and like Beaumont and north, like Paris, that it is very interesting for this project. Also, the urban areas, they are. It's very interesting to implement this on those, and it can provide a huge, probably cost saving, because the problem with the slope failures is not necessarily the slope itself, is the structures around it. So when we have urban areas and we have congestion of bridges, these failures can cause significant problem for those bridges. So in urban areas like Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, I see huge potential, saving potentials as well, if we can find those and repair them before even they show failure. So those are also interesting. The ones that they are in urban areas and the soil conditions not stable. And I gave you a couple of names.
Got it. And how does your system differ from existing ways of monitoring slopes and trying to identify failures before they manifest into something serious?
This is the first time that something is implemented in whole district. It's like we are covering more than 300 miles of district roadways. And it is not, we are not instrumenting those. We are using available information about those, which is making that interesting. And that is the reason that that validation that I mentioned before, Tom, is very important. I wanted to see with available information that we have in TxSTIC, available information, public information that we have about our roadways. How can we prioritize these slopes? And I found significant amount of information. It is interesting. For only one county in Paris district, I found more than 20 terabytes of useful information that I can use in my analysis. So I can tell you that we have huge amount of information that can help us to do all this analysis, but we are not currently using that. So this system is for the first time actually enabling us. However, it is still geotechnical based models behind that. This is the first time that at this scale we are using geotechnical based models. Usually they use statistical models, and with using some regression models, they come up with some prioritization and show the critical models. But the predictability of those is very low because of their nature. So this is how it is different from them. It is highly rooted. It is in the geotechnical aspects of the failure. In the meantime, we could scale it up in the whole district sense. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Shelley, is your hand still up? Do you have another comment?
No, it is not.
Okay.
But and I can say thank you.
I apologize that I just don't have that good functionality on my end. So, are there any other questions that anyone would like to pose on this very interesting presentation? Great. Well, thank you, Professor, and congratulations on that award. And this is great stuff.
Thank you.
So our next presentation is by Sid Martinez and Cecilia Martinez from the Alamo Area MPO. It's going to be a very visually stimulating presentation. So I will turn it over to them. Welcome.
Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you just fine.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. My name is Sid Martinez, and I will not be doing this presentation. So I just wanted to quickly introduce it, and Cecilia will be making it. But I am the director of the MPO here in San Antonio, and I've actually been a part of this group for a little while now. And I really enjoyed learning about the innovative research and strategies that are being implemented around the state. So I know some of you are probably not very familiar with MPOs, but among the many things that we are tasked with or responsible for, we're responsible for planning and programming major transportation projects within our communities. And over the last few years, I think all of you know, technology has made it pretty easy to collect and distribute big data. And we've been given access to so much of it to help us make some important decisions. But the problem is that we're given is usually just a big data dump of numbers, and it's up to us to figure out how we're going to turn that data into a tool for public and decision makers. So our MPO is lucky to have some very talented geographic information systems, or GIS folks, that have helped us visualize that data. They've helped us turn it into, on a very large spectrum, at the very least end, a good public information tool. And at the very high end, we've been able to use this data to make investment decisions, and even to examine how portions of our transportation system are performing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cecilio Martinez, no relation whatsoever. He is our GIS manager here at the MPO, and he'll take you through a quick presentation highlighting some of the work that we've done over the years. So Cecilio, whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, good afternoon. Today I will be giving a presentation on how the Alamo Area MPO is leveraging data visualization applications. I will show how we kept up with the demands of visual applications and how we are continuing to grow with the advancements in technology. Okay. First, let me introduce myself and my team. My name is Cecilio Martinez. I am the GIS manager for the Alamo Area MPO. I've been doing GIS for over 20 years now, and what I'll be presenting today could not have been done without the vision of the Alamo Area MPO and the GIS team. So let's go ahead and introduce them. And you're on the right slide. Clay Elkins is our GIS web analyst. He designs and maintains all of our websites. He developed the Tableau Crash dashboard that I will highlight later in today's presentation. Wendy Dotson is our GIS analyst. She is our Esri application guru. She maintains our interactive mapping application we call IMAP, and develops story maps and crowdsourcing applications for various public outreach efforts. She is currently working on updating the environmental justice layers, all of which I will show today. So let's get started. Next slide. There are mainly two software companies that we use. The first one is the one you are all familiar with, which is Esri. And they are an international supplier of geographic information system software, also web GIS and geodatabase management applications. We use their desktop application and their various online solutions. Here are some of the examples that we've used Esri for. And these are some of the screenshots from some of our various efforts that we've done in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. The second is Tableau. Tableau is a powerful and fast-growing data visualization tool used in the business intelligence industry. It helps in simplifying raw data into a very easy, understandable format. Next slide, please. So here's a neat little timeline that took me all day to do. But let's take a quick look at our visual application timeline. Back in 2010, we launched our very first interactive online mapping tool, an Esri-based application we call IMAP. It has a variety of transportation-related layers and tools to view and interact with. It's not only used by our staff, but also partner agencies and citizens. Then in 2013, we utilized Tableau. Yeah, we're going to stay in that one slide. So then in 2013, we utilized Tableau to easily create a crash dashboard, which we still use to this day. Then in 2016, we combined several public meeting surveys and leveraged Tableau to show the results to citizens. Then in 2018, we used Esri's story maps to engage citizens to help promote more involvement in our public meetings. Our best year was in 2019, as we introduced the crowdsourcing concept to our public meeting. Citizens were engaged and eager to share our application on social media. Then in 2019-2020, we put all of the new tools and applications to the test with our Alamo Commutes program. Then COVID-19 hit and it stopped most of our public outreach efforts. But we've taken the advantage of this time to promote our work. We have presented at local, national, and international conferences. One in particular that we're very proud of was being selected to present at the International Esri User Conference, usually held in San Diego, California. This year, they went virtual due to the COVID-19. And of course, today's presentation with you all. So let's take a look at our first application. Next slide, please. IMAP was launched in 2010 and was our first application to go online. The interactive mapping viewer has multiple transportation-related layers and tools to assist you in your analysis. It also contains links to our open data site, our crash stats dashboard, and access to our travel demand model data. Next slide, please. Here's an example of freight data showing truck count and percent trucks within selected roadways. This visualization was greatly valued by local planners. Next slide, please. We not only have our data layers on IMAP, but also from our transportation partners like Via Metropolitan Transit, TxSTIC, FHWA, and our travel demand model data. So you can tell we have a lot of useful data on this application. But as we started to get more robust data sets like the crash data, we needed a different solution. Next slide, please. Tableau offered an affordable solution, and by affordable, I mean free. Tableau offers a paid and free version of its application. We started using Tableau back in 2013 and still use it to this day. It's a powerful and easy way to visualize your simple and complex data. Here we have taken the crash data and created an interactive dashboard. Next slide, please. With this dashboard, we're able to ask questions and based on our criteria, offer us answers. In this example, we can select the crash year of 2019, the county of Bear, then select bicycle-related crashes only. The results are dynamic, displayed in an easy way to identify trends. Not only do you get stats, but also the locations of these crashes. Next slide, please. We gain access to more big data we could easily import into Tableau. We use Tableau to tie where people rode their bikes, what time, and how frequent to decide where to have our promotional bike outreach efforts. Next slide, please. One of our most interesting use of Tableau is linking our travel demand trip generation forecast numbers to create an origin and destination interactive map. Users were able to select areas within our study area and see how people moved in and out based on trip purpose. Here we can see 2025 person trips and how it relates to the city of New Braunfels' internal and external trips. Next slide, please. Finally, we use Tableau at public meetings and online visualization survey data from citizens and presented the results in near real time. This was useful, but we needed more flexibility at our public meetings and online. As citizens became more tech savvy, the demand grew more for that interaction. Next slide, please. So in 2018, Esri launched a suite of applications to include story maps. This was a solution that we could use to engage citizens in a more interactive experience. We were able to embed multimedia applications like YouTube videos, PDFs, and a mix of interactive maps. Next slide, please. Citizens were able to pick a project and get more details than they could before. Here's an example of a proposed project and the actual submittal document with maps and details describing a fuller scope of the project. Next slide, please. Okay. Citizens were able to view multiple interactive maps in one location. Here we are showing the proposed roadway projects against existing projects for connectivity. This is a good start and was leading to something very promising. Next slide, please. So this was our very first true attempt at crowdsourcing, and this was part of our 2019 Your Move campaign. We created an easy step-by-step online experience for citizens. 2 crowdsourcing applications were developed in-house. They were Map Your Concerns and Provide Project Feedback. Next slide, please. So on Map Your Concerns, citizens were given 4 categories: active transportation, public transportation, traffic congestion, and traffic safety. We asked them to identify their areas of concerns as related in these categories. Next slide, please. So citizens could provide us with detailed information of their concerns, and others could rally behind it by liking it. Next slide. Well, actually, go back. One slide. Okay. So we could then dynamically rank concerns based on the number of likes. Yeah, just go forward one slide. There we go. So as you can tell from this screenshot here, you can start to see that ranking. So as citizens were submitting their concerns, the other citizens were able to like that comment. So then that would then come to the top. Okay, next slide, please. The second crowdsourced application was Provide Project Feedback. In this case, we wanted comments on our current long-range and short-range projects. We were once again able to collect number of likes per project and also rank them dynamically. Next slide. In addition, we were able to collect comments from citizens that we could then pass along to the project sponsoring agency. Next slide, please. Citizens were engaged and found the application easy to use. We even had community leaders sharing the applications on their social media platforms. We found this endeavor to be one of our best outreach efforts. Next slide, please. The data collected from the Your Move campaign then was used to supplement two separate transportation planning efforts, the Kendall County, Bernie, and Fair Oaks Transportation Committee, and the New Braunfels Transit Study. So we took that information that we collected from the Your Move campaign and these other two separate planning efforts, then utilized that information. Next slide, please. The Kendall County, Bernie, and Fair Oaks Transportation Committee were so impressed with the Your Move format and workflow that they asked us to create a similar campaign for them. They called it Plan Your Mobility. So it very much mirrored what we had created for the Your Move. And so it was very effective. Next slide, please. Finally, we were able to use all that we've learned with story maps, surveys, and crowdsourcing and applied it to the Alamo Commutes program. The program launched an effort to work with local businesses and organizations to encourage their employees to consider multimodal transportation options as they made their way to work. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we worked with these employers and conducted a bike. Oh, go back. Sorry, go back. There we go. We worked with these employers and conducted a bike and walking audit around their place of business to determine what multimodal transportation options were available and what obstructions existed. Next slide, please. So then, based on the employee survey, we were able to identify clusters of employees with similar interests and alternative ways to get to work. So we could match employees that would consider carpooling together to get to work. Next slide, please. The deliverable was a password-protected website with all the data and applications in a dynamic, interactive report format. So this was taking all that information that we had collected and then providing this as a dynamic report, as opposed to just a standalone PDF. So that's something that we were able to create for them. Next slide, please. Currently, we are working to improve our environmental justice layers with a new Esri application called Experience Builder. We're still in the development of this, and it's looking very promising. So these are some of the examples how the Alamo area MPO is leveraging data visualization applications. Next slide. Technology is an ever-changing landscape and takes a team to navigate to help keep our citizens moving. As we explore these new applications and other data visualization platforms, we hope that they will encourage and promote civic engagement in our study area. Next. And that's pretty much it. And if y'all have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Really inspiring, the work you're doing. Kirk, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just had, Tom, I just had one question to Cecilia. The use of your GIS for EJ and Title VI type of analysis, what efforts are being planned to develop a analysis framework for low-income and minority communities within your area, especially for those areas that don't have access to computers or...
Oh, the digital divide?
Yeah, digital divide type situation.
Yeah. Well, that's something like I said, that we're still in development, but we have some local data people that I'm associated with, the Alamo Regional Data Alliance. And there's a young lady there, Emily Royale, and she she used to work for the Rivard Report, and now she's with the City of San Antonio. And so she has a pretty comprehensive digital divide resources for some layers. So that's something we can definitely take a look at if that's something that we're needing to add to our EJ. Like I said, we're in the process of updating all that right now. So that was kind of a sneak peek, but but there is information out there from our local data groups that are looking at that digital data divide.
Thank you. I think your work is outstanding, and I don't know of any other MPO going to this degree in their visualization. It's really an outstanding project. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, this is great. I know the Atlanta Regional Council has a group of data folks who work a lot in Tableau and have a partnership with their local Chamber of Commerce, and it might be worth tracking that down. They're doing some very excellent work, similar to what you've done, Cecilia. Have you gotten any feedback from the public? Do they prefer the kind of interactive tools that you've rolled out? Or have you found a certain, well, we kind of liked it the old way with paper and pencils?
That's a great question. Actually, at the when we were helping out the Kendall County Bear and Fair Oaks Transportation Committee, we were just kind of going to just be there as a resource to help out. And one of the first questions to the chair, he was like, I do not want to do that technology. I just want a map, a paper map and a pencil, and that's all I want. But towards the end of the process, we converted him. He was like, "This is so awesome," and he really enjoyed it. And the only I guess bad thing about that particular effort was we were in the middle of all that, and then like I said, COVID-19 hit, so that had to. They ended up putting a stop to it. But we did collect a lot of information, and a lot of the subcommittees ended up working with that information, and we even created like a dashboard that was connected to the crowdsourcing application. So as this information was being collected, then we could quickly analyze it into a dashboard. So that was really neat. But to your point, we've converted some, and I'm an old school guy too. And but we've converted some of the old school people to embrace this technology, and we kind of noticed that at some of the public meetings, because the crowdsourcing application, we actually provided them with iPads, and so all it took was just a little bit of coaching. Say, okay, this is where you do this, do that, and then they're like, leave me alone. I have all these comments, so they started, just marking up the map. And like I said, we had that one county commissioner, and she was pushing that on her social media, and so were other people. And so we found that really interesting because we had never seen that before with any of our previous efforts, where people were actually campaigning and using what we provided at these public meetings and online on their social media platforms. So that was really interesting to see. But it was interesting to see people really embrace it. Even the ones that really didn't want to embrace it.
Got it. And speaking of embracing it, it looked like, and it was hard to see from the detail, that you have perhaps something used in the project selection process, a dashboard that folks who want to advance projects kind of make their case using some of your visualization tools. Did I see that right? And if so, how are your policymakers affecting or responding to getting more direct public input on types of projects and location of projects?
Yeah, one of the things on the scoring criteria for the and like I said, Sid might be able to speak more to this because I'm the tech guy, he's the policy guy. But we're able to collect the feedback from the citizens in order to apply towards a scoring criteria. So that does come into play as we're doing project selection. So I think that was your question.
We do. I don't know if you can hear me, but we do have like a three-prong approach every time we do a call for projects. We do a technical score, of course, which most MPOs do, and then we do another prong, which is public involvement and public engagement, and that's where we go out and use these tools to get the public's feedback on which project should be selected. And then, of course, the board can include any type of non-technical related issues they might see, like regionalism that's important, or making sure that we have projects that are funded in some of the EJ areas, which might not score as well. So, I mean, it takes all three of those prongs to kind of prop those projects up and to get a good balance of projects. But yes, we definitely have. We've always included some type of public involvement. Back in the day, 20 years ago, we were using a spreadsheet, printed paper of maps and projects, and people were sitting there ranking projects. Or, we've done things where we were giving people monopoly money and they were putting money towards the type of projects they wanted. So we've always had some type of public aspect or element to our project selection process, but this has made it so much easier, and it's really increased the participation, being able to do this online, and then taking these iPads and being able to do this publicly as well in our meetings. It's worked out really well.
That's great. Well, thank you both for a really inspiring look at the work that you and your MPO are doing. We're now going to transition to our topic 4, our final presentation. And the previous presenters have set the bar really high. Chandra Dubrovny and then we have Blair Johnson, I guess, co-presenting. So look forward to you batting cleanup and looking forward to your presentation. So take it away, please.
Thank you very much. Can you actually hear me?
Can certainly hear you.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. This is Chiara Dobrovolny. I work for Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and I'm a research scientist here looking at designing and investigating roadside safety hardware according to the testing and evaluation criteria standards that we have. Like it was mentioned, I will co-presenting this project results with Dr. Johnson from UT Austin. She will have some description of her task later in the presentation, and then I will come back and actually complete the presentation with the final crash testing. Next, please. Next. Thank you. Well, first, I'd like to, on behalf of my team, I'd like to thank the project manager, Wade Odell, and all the project panel members for their guidance throughout the project and their very active participation. And also, I would like to thank a number of our TTI researchers as well as UT researchers that have jointly collaborated to the success of this project. Next, please. I'd like to go through quickly the agenda, and just for limiting the presentation within the 20 minutes allocated, we'll explain the synopsis and the objective of this project and how we approach it. And then Dr. Johnson will talk about the hydraulic testing, and then I will get back with the full-scale crash testing, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions or comments. Please keep in mind that actually this project has been completed, and the report is in its final phase of development. So if you have any specific questions, please be aware that you can always contact our project manager, Wade Odell, and hopefully the report that will be soon published. Next, please. All right, I have the next 3 slides have put a few pictures, a few photos that I thought would be interesting to describe, to try to describe the problem that we wanted to investigate. And actually this, if you go back with just 1 slide, please, I think that this picture would probably best describe the need that we had to face within this project. And I actually was intrigued by the agenda that was sent out, because under our topic, it said it was an infrastructure and maintenance hot topic, and probably this and the next slide later will describe the reasoning. So what you're looking at is actually a photo that was taken, and it's a two-way roadways, divided highway. And the barrier that you see in front, right in the picture, is a concrete barrier that is very commonly utilized as a median protection. So one of the objectives of the barrier, actually probably the most important objective for the barrier, for the implementation in mediums, is for public safety. In other words, if there is an errant vehicle, if you have a concrete barrier right there in the medium, the barrier is supposed to contain the vehicle, redirect it, and avoid that the errant vehicle is actually going in the other part of the divided highway. But it's pretty obvious from this photo that unfortunately, when you utilize this type of barriers, you might get into some potential problems, especially in some specific situations. This became very obvious in the past few years, especially not only, but especially even with Hurricane Harvey. You've probably seen a lot of pictures that were pretty much similar to this case. And Harvey was pretty much an unprecedented situation, more rare than anything else. But in Texas specifically, it doesn't take much to have torrential rains. And then you might have a canal or a river or some type of water pond on one side of the road, and then it floods, and then the flow of the water try to get out and get on the roadway. And this is what happening if you have a concrete barrier. The concrete barrier is designed for impacts, and it is designed for have a certain structural adequacy. And really nothing happened to it. The barrier is going to stay there, and it actually functions as a dam, basically, as you can see. And so it's not just a problem for the actual road itself and transportation, of course, but think about the neighborhood that is on the other side that now is flooded, and there is no way for this water to come out. So next slide, please. This photo shows what actually it has to be done. It had to be done at one point. I think this was in Beaumont, in the Beaumont district. The only way that you basically were left with, it was to basically explode the barrier. So to allow the water to go from one side to another and slowly drain it for what it could be done. And of course, we talked about before infrastructure and maintenance of topic. This is not just a problem with the barrier functioning as a dam, but if you explode it or you find similar ways to drain the water, and then you're left with something that you would have to basically rebuild. You need to keep the road closed until everything is set it up. So there are a lot of consequences to this. Next slide, please. So the objective of this project was to develop a medium barrier that would be needed to be implemented at flood-prone areas. The main objective for this barrier would be to accommodate the passage of flood water and therefore reduce the severity of flooding like we saw in the previous photos. Hopefully decrease the risk to motorists and others in the area. I mentioned about the neighborhood. Reduce the damage level to the highway and surrounding area. Talk about explosions or some drastic needs of that level. But let's not forget that these barriers are ultimately implemented like I was mentioning before, in median areas to prevent errant vehicles to go on the other side. So the barrier that we were going to develop that would have to be designed and would have to comply with the latest testing and evaluation criteria for the safety hardware, which is called MESH, the Manual for Assessing Safety Hardware. Next, please. So actually, the slide, if you click one more time, there it is. Okay, so this project was a 2-year-long project that looked into, like I said before, developing and evaluate design concept and design these concepts. And we did have to include different tasks in our approach. Because of the specific objective of this project, we had to include conduction, and we wanted to, of course, conduction of large-scale hydraulic testing, as well as we did detailed developed design through computer finite element analysis. Just because of the sake of time for the presentation for today, I'm not going into every single detail, but the presentation will specifically highlight the large-scale hydraulic testing that was conducted, that Dr. Johnson will talk about, and the construction of the barrier, the design concept that was chosen by the panel, and the construction of barrier systems, and the full-scale crash testing that was performed on the barrier system per MESH standards. Next, please. And before I let Dr. Johnson talk, on the hydraulic part, I just wanted to give a quick idea of the different potential designs that we proposed, and because it's going to be helpful to understand the work in the hydraulic section that she did and she'll talk about. Earlier in the project, we brainstormed to propose potential design. And I mentioned in this slide the 3 specific potential designs that were proposed. 2 of them were concrete-only barriers, and the third one was actually a steel-only barrier design, all for median applications. The first one is what we have called the large scupper median barrier. Is a 42 inches tall, single slope concrete median barrier. And it's not, if you look at the elevation view, it might not be very easy to understand, but we have pictures later on. It has it was proposed and actually ultimately designed to have 30-foot long segments. And within each of these 30-foot long segments, 18 feet within the segment was basically a scupper. And the scupper was tall 13 inches tall. So you'll see from the photos later, it's a huge scupper that was designed. And the potential design of the LSMB that is presented was developed to follow the traffic single slope 42 inches concrete barrier that TxSTIC is using. The second potential design option that was proposed is a post and beam concrete median barrier, 42 inches tall with 13 inches tall concrete post opening. And this was actually designed or proposed, a preliminary design, to resemble more, for those of you who are more familiar with bridge railings, to the T223 barrier type. Concrete bridge rail barrier type in TxSTIC. The last potential design was actually, like I mentioned before, an open steel-only rail, 38 inches tall. And in this case, we suggested separate longitudinal HSS rails. And this rail was actually designed to resemble more closely to another bridge rail that TxSTIC is using, which is the C1W, although that is more on a concrete, and we had to move away, obviously, the concrete curb portion, because otherwise it would be another small, few inches of dam that would create. Next, please. Blair?
All right, can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Kiara's crew at TTI did all the structural work. At UT Austin, we worked on all of the hydraulic testing. So this work was performed with Michael Barrett, who's a research professor, Brandon Klenzendorf, who worked on a similar study during his PhD, and he now works at Geosyntec, and then Greg Hendrickson was the master's student who did all of the testing and analysis for this. Next slide, please. So we'll go through the quick process that we considered for this project. I'll show you the construction of the model barriers that we constructed for hydraulic testing. You'll see there's a little bit different scaling, some different considerations that we do and don't have to take account for when we're testing in water versus testing for structural stability. The second is, this is the most important part. So we're measuring the upstream water depth. So you can imagine that's really the flood depth at increasing flow rates for each barrier. So just kind of what is the hydraulic efficiency, how much relative flooding is each barrier going to generate for different flows. The third step is to create these rating curves. So this is a specific energy versus the flow rate. I'll explain what all of it means. And then the final step for implementation would be to demonstrate this HECRAS application. So HECRAS is a model developed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it is used to predict flooding and standing water effects in different floodplains or bridge crossings, different topographies. And so we can use HECRAS to then predict how, once we replace traditional concrete barriers with the new barrier with the opening that we're proposing, how will flooding actually be reduced? So I'll just go through a little quick highlight of some of that. All right, next slide, please. So, all right, so when we started testing, this is an image of an existing single slope concrete barrier in our water channel. And so this is the barrier. This is a wooden version of a barrier that you would see on most standard highways. This is our 42-inch single slope solid. We cannot pass any water through this. Any water that is going to get through has to go over the top of this. And so as you saw in the introductory photos, that's 42 inches of standing water before it can overtop this and drain. So this is absolutely our worst case scenario, but we wanted it just to have the data point of what are we dealing with now, and then how will the proposed barriers be an improvement upon that design. All right, so we did testing on this. And the next slide, please. All right, so then this is the single slope with tapered opening, or as Kara called it, the LSMB barrier. So this very closely resembles that single slope barrier, but you'll see there's an opening at the base of this. That orange base it's sitting on is just a platform to keep it bolted to the flume. But really that opening would be at, the level of the asphalt on the highway. So we have an opening at the base. There's some nice tapering on either side. That is to help with crash purposes, but it also looked nice from a hydraulic standpoint to keep this kind of streamlined. So this is the single slope barrier with opening. Next slide, please. Here is the post and beam. This is just two vertical rectangular posts with a solid rectangular beam across it. You might notice that this has the spacing or the size of the opening at the base looks a bit bigger than the previous one. So basically, as we're going through these three options, you'll see the openings get larger and larger, meaning we have more, let's say, potential for water to flow through this. So they're becoming more efficient, but then also the larger the opening, the less structure there is to resist the crash intention of this barrier. So here's our post and beam, and then next slide, please. Our final barrier with an opening, this is our steel barrier. So this is a modified version of an existing barrier that TxSTIC already uses. And so here we have lots of openings. This is just steel square beams, 2 vertical pillars, and then I think we had in total 6 cross beams. Tons of opening. There's an opening at the bottom, and then there's also openings higher up in this. So we have potential for huge passage of water through this. All right, next slide, please. All right, and one final thing to consider was that once these barriers are installed on an actual highway, there may be maintenance to the highway before the barriers are replaced. And so we need to consider, what if, we have our normal installation shown on the left with the orange base. That would be the fresh installation. But later on, there might be asphalt overlaying on that road by 2 inches on either side of this. They're not going to pave through the barrier itself, but just in front of and behind it. And so we also did tests with a modeled asphalt overlay to see how much that asphalt is going to reduce the hydraulic capacity of each of these barriers. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so here is an image, just a schematic of the flume or water channel we're using to do this. This is a really big channel. So basically the upper section in this diagram shows that main rectangular concrete channel that the water flows through. So in this, the water would flow. We have a reservoir at the base. There's 2 pumps along the left, but you can see the pipes. Water will then flow from left to right through that main channel before falling into the return channel and back to the reservoir. So it's a recirculating flume of sorts. You can see we have in the top, there's the model section. So that is where each median barrier would be located. In real life, these barriers will be 30 feet wide. Our channel was only 5 feet wide. And so we had to scale everything down horizontally and vertically to maintain the same fractional opening of the designed barrier, so that we can accurately measure how much water is coming out, what is the flooding depth upstream of the barrier. So we measured, you can see measurement locations, there's 4 dots. That's where we measured the upstream flooding, and then way downstream there's a discharge weir and a point gauge. That's where we measured the volumetric flow rate of water coming through. So we ran this for that solid barrier and then the 3 barriers with openings. All right, next slide, please. Here is a video, if we can get that to play. Let's see if this runs. Just so you can get a sense of, this is the LSMB, the large scupper barrier. Sorry for the sound. And so you can see that this is the upstream view looking downstream. So we have water piling up behind the barrier, but there's also a ton of water coming through that opening. So this is what we really want to see is, can we maximize the water coming through without letting that water keep raising and raising and potentially overtopping? We want to have the minimum water height as possible. So this shows that. Thank you. All right, and let's go ahead to our next slide. I could watch that all day, but I know you guys all have other things.
And speaking of all day, we have hit 3:30, so if you could move to finish up, that'd be great.
Okay, sorry, I'll go quick. Okay, so this is our rating curve. What this is showing us is basically the top orange points. This is our worst case scenario. This is our solid barrier that we have now on the highway. The blue case here shows us the barrier with an opening. Orange, the red is going to be the post and beam. The green is that steel barrier. So basically, the more open the barrier is, the more flow you can get through with minimizing the water depth. So according to this diagram, this tells us that our steel barrier is hydraulically the best, but for crash purposes, it's going to be difficult to implement. But at least we know there's a significant increase or improvement in hydraulic flow based on any of these barriers. We also have the overlay points on here. They cause a minor reduction in flow, but not significant. So I guess we can go ahead to the next one. This I will just mention really quick. HECRAS is a great model. If you want to talk about it offline, send me an email. But this is going to tell us how we can predict what the future flood depths will be once these barriers are installed. HECRAS is used to look at bridge crossings, but not so much in open floodplains where we may not really think much of the topography. So we've developed an iterative approach where we can figure out how do we implement different barriers and predict this before we go out, knock barrier down and put a new one on the highway. This is still kind of in progress. It would be a great future development project to look through of getting real topography data so we can predict this in different floodplains. All right, next slide. And I think that's back to, oh, no, keep going, sorry. Next slide again. I think we're going backwards. One more. All right, there we go. This is back to Kira.
All right, can you hear me back? Okay, so that's a video, you can run it. I thought there were other, there was another video before, but we can start with this one here. So according to the mesh standard criteria, and actually you can go now to the next video as well. According to the mesh criteria, we have to test the system with, in this case, it's called for testable for conditions or high-speed applications. With 3 different vehicles. One is the passenger car that you are looking at right now. And the passenger car will impact the system at 62, nominal 62 mile per hour speed and 25-degree angle. The purpose of this test is to make sure that the vehicle is contained and redirected, which actually is what happens. Also that the vehicle stay in stable conditions. And in this case, we only had a maximum roll of 18 degrees. So it was pretty good, good test. But specifically with the passenger cars, we are looking into occupant risks, making sure that what the occupant would feel in terms of velocity and acceleration is actually acceptable by the human. And in this case, we didn't have any issue as well. The maximum deflection in this specific test of the barrier was a dynamic deflection of 1.8 inches, and the permanent deformation was only 0.4 inches. So we know that the barrier has passed this test based on all these mesh criteria. Next slide, please. Next one. Okay, then we're missing the pickup truck and the SUT. I don't know if you have it in try maybe to go back. Go back. Go back.
I think this was a subtle hint that we're 5 minutes or more past the adjournment time. So okay. Maybe you could to conclusions. Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah, well, we did perform 2 more full-scale crash tests, one with the SUT, the single unit truck, and one with a pickup truck, and they both pass. So the system is basically ready for implementation. And I guess just a couple of different comments without that I go into all the details of the implementation is that while we'll test it with specific anchorages for flexible pavement, we also have developed anchorages for concrete pavements as well. So this barrier will be ready for implementation with different type of anchorages for both a concrete slab or just flexible pavements as needed. I don't know if there are any specific questions.
Great. Thank you for your presentation. And are there, I see Wade Odell has his hand raised. Wade?
Yes, thanks, Tom. I'll make this very quick since we're over. Yeah, we were very pleased with the results of this project to see how we could deal with flooding conditions. So in East Texas and the Houston area, where hurricanes, well, where flooding is pretty imminent. So what's happening following on the heels of this particular project is that one of our directors of transportation planning and development in the Beaumont district has taken the plans, have taken the schematics that were developed as a result of these projects, of this project, and they are going to actually be constructing these barriers out there in East Texas in the Beaumont district on certain roadways. Also following on the heels of the success of this project is the fact that we've got a new project that's going to be starting on September 1st to look at the same kind of barrier in temporary barriers and flooding conditions, like in work zone areas and stuff like that. So temporary barriers do work a little bit different from permanent barriers. So it'll be interesting to see if they have the same kind of positive results from this project. And thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you for our 2 presenters. It's excellent work, and you really illustrated kind of how I began this is pointing out that this work really builds on existing strengths and finds new and creative ways to improve the way we deliver transportation effectively and safely. So thank you everyone who participated in today's events. Thank you for all who contributed as presenters, chat, links, etc. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
People.
Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you, Tom. I saw you came back on. But yeah, we are adjourned. We're going to send out an email. We're going to send out an email to the STIC members and also to the participants. The participants will get a copy of the slides, and STIC members will follow up on this date for November 18th, 2020 as the potential next STIC meeting. I know we've lost some council members, so we'll just have to follow up at a later time. But if anybody else has anything they would like to ask, they can send their question to the Texas LTAP email that's in the chat, and we'll funnel that question appropriately and then get back with you. Thank you all, and you are free to go. Have a good evening.